Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Whining On. My name's Matthew Bowden, the Incorrigible Rogue, and today I'm with Matt Barnard. Matt, please say a little bit about yourself.
Good evening. Well, it's nice to be here.
Nice to have you here.
Yeah, thanks very much. I am unremarkable in the street entertainment world, being just another one of those buskers who started at Covent Garden and went on to other things. But I suppose the only thing I have to offer over and above what I've done is that I did write a research degree about the history of London's street theatre. So I suppose I have a little bit of knowledge about that. It was post-war, after 1945, mainly about the centre of London, a little bit about Leicester Square, theatres, queues, more about Covent Garden in the early days, sort of up to when I was working it. I wrote it in 99, so that's when I was still there. And a little bit about what was going on around the country and sort of the tone. Say that again, Matt, you froze.
Yeah, sorry, while I'm sharing everything up on the site, you're not just an academic. I've been looking on, I think it was Fool's Paradise today, and checking out some of the stuff. You're a working cabaret act, you're a street act as well, no?
Yeah, I mean, I've made my living as an entertainer for the last 30 years. Yeah, something like that. So maybe a bit less. So yeah, and I've done a variety of stuff, which is great, and I enjoy it. And I really enjoyed, my days as a busker, sort of up until the last few years when I got pissed off with it. But particularly at the beginning, I was very enthusiastic.
We can come to that later on, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm still. So yeah, just ask me when you want me to talk about how it started and stuff. And
yeah, by all means. So I think we're all shared up now. I think everybody's been linked who needs to be linked for the video. My focus is yours. So yeah, let's start at the beginning. Why go on this path? Why be an entertainer?
Well, I think what happened is when I was growing up, my dad lived in London. I lived in Kent, in Whitstable in Kent. And I used to come to London for the weekends, sort of every 3 or 4 weekends. And at the time, from the age of about 8 or 9, I suppose, I wanted to go to Covent Garden. So I was born in 71. And so I guess I was there, starting to go there, maybe 78, 79, 80, something like that. And then carried on wanting to go there because it was an exciting place for a kid. It had live acts that I'd never seen before. I was already a big fan of comedy, but the live acts that I saw there were really interesting and exciting and very varied at the time. And like as a place for a kid to spend a Sunday, it was great. You could sit down, you could watch shows, you could have a jacket potato, you could go to Liked Fantastic, the Holograph Museum, you could go to the Toy Theatre place and the Automata place. There were 3 or 4 different places where people were doing shows at the time. The back end was open where the Opera House is now, Julie's Pantry, so that was like a little gardens where bands would play. And then there was a pitch in front of that as well. And so it was great. Wander around, have a nice time. And sort of when I was in my, 11, 12, 13, when I started to really become interested in it, I was also trying to do busking in Canterbury as well. I couldn't do any circus skills at that point, but I was singing with guitars and trying to play music and sing with my mates and stuff. So the kind of idea of doing it live and on the streets was always in there. And it's interesting, you know, that some of the people that I saw right in the early days in, like, you know, 80, 81, 82, 83 were still there when I started to do shows there, which was later on. So so I had that kind of induction. I learned to juggle in the kind of hippie rave era when everyone was just stoned and doing pills and going to raves, and juggling was
like 87, 88, this kind of era.
Yeah, it was sort of when I was finishing school, so it was 88, 89, 90.
And were you a theatrical lad? Were you doing theatre in school? Were you
I always liked singing. My dad was a guitar player and a singer, and I always liked that. I always liked school plays and stuff. But the sort of the twitchy aspect of juggling at the time was very appealing to me. And also, I wasn't keen on the hallucinogens. I wasn't keen on the ecstasy and the MDMA either. So when I went to raves, I was much more interested in drinking Stella and juggling at the time. And so
when you say the twitchy aspect,
so, you know,
do you mean something to do with your hands? Were you a nervous guy?
And something to, you know, like magicians are always dicking around with a pack of cards. The same thing, really. So I always enjoyed forwards and backwards. You know, I always enjoyed that activity. The nice thing about it is as the sort of rave scene faded away, I sort of discovered Circus Workshop. So in Whitstable, some good friends of mine now called Steve and Tina, who ran the Kent Circus School, ran a good circus workshop. There were another few in Kent I used to go to as well. And so I ended up going to those, doing some street shows at the time with the guy that I was working with called Nick. We would do a very basic juggling show. And that was sort of one of the first times that I kind of understood how a circle show worked and the machinations of it. Because I remember seeing in Canterbury, Dave Evans, great Dave, and Gareth, who is, you know, one of my closest friends now and I work with now, and his old partner Dean doing their Red Hot show, which was a Star Wars fifth take show. I remember seeing them in Canterbury.
So Gareth's Soapy. Yeah. Gareth's Soapy, but I can't remember Gareth's last name for the life of me now. What's Gareth's last name?
Gareth Jones.
Jones, I thought it was Jones, yes.
Yeah.
So you saw Dave Evans and Gareth Jones.
In Canterbury High Street on a day when, you know, Gareth told me later if they didn't get a show at the Draw, they'd sometimes drive down to Canterbury. And watched those shows, liked them, thought they were funny. But I always kind of marveled at the idea that people could come up with these incredible off-the-cuff lines and, you know, do these incredible stunts. Particularly, I like the stunts. And when I started doing shows with Nick, which was a very basic kind of hobby juggling show, the mistake that all jugglers make when they first go out to try and put everything they can do in it and forget about the structure of the show and the comedy and stuff. And as it happens, one of the first days we ever did it, when I guess I was 18 or 19, maybe 17, 18, Vince Henderson and Dave Holder, who was very funny unicycle straitjacket act, but more a comedian than us. He used to call himself a stuntman. But they happened to be traveling through on their way to a European festival. And they saw us in town waiting to do a show, and they were like, oh, is it all right if we do a show? And we, you know, this was our pitch, and we were very magnanimous and said, yeah, you can do a show, but, you know, we're going to do our show first. And we went out and earned our 15 quid and pulled 10 or 12 people. And then the two of them, working together because I think it was more of a tough pitch, just went out and did an enormous, hilarious show with incredible lines. And I remember at the time sort of sitting on my case inside their edge and having to like keep moving back as their edge got bigger and bigger. And it was a real testament to experience and hubris and humility. and it was great. That show, it was really funny, and so the sort of combination of that and the kind of recognition of seeing Dave and Gareth and watching shows at Covent Garden at the weekend meant that eventually, when I had a sort of stack of circus skills and I was teaching a lot of workshops and doing demonstrations and stuff, when I came to college and dropped out after the first year, I then started working in a museum in Covent Garden in the basement called Cabaret Mechanical Theatre, which was a lovely...
Oh, was that where the Apple store is now?
No, it's down where the quartets play.
Ah, okay.
It's in the opposite row of shops as the quartets are looking out. It's not there anymore.
Yeah. And so what was it like?
When they put the rents out, they couldn't afford to stay. About 10, 15 years ago, I guess. It was run by a batty, lovely, arty woman called Sue from Cornwall, who liked moving machines. And she had a tiny little museum in Falmouth. And when Covent Garden was starting, when it wanted a variety of shops and it wanted arts, when the Apple Market was open and the other market was open, when the Jubilee Market, you had to have crafts in there, for example. You know, they were crying out for stuff like that. So it was a good place for her. And she had automata made by sort of artists who crossed over from being craftsmen into being well-known artists, people like Tim Hunkin, who had a bit of publicity in TV shows, Paul Spooner, who's like considered the sort of the king of that style of craft art automata. He made beautiful things, and then a lot of other stuff. So it's half a museum exhibition, half coin-operated machine. And you know, she was very liberal, and she'd buy us all gin and tonics halfway through the day, and she was a great person to work for. And eventually, as I used to watch shows during the day and I used to hang out at the juggling stall, the More Balls Than Most stall that was there.
Just to do a check, what sort of year are we on now? Is this like 85, so 86, 87, 91?
I was 20, I guess 21. So we're talking 91. 91, 92. And while I was working there, I eventually sort of plucked up enough courage to do an audition. You know, I knew a few of the performers because I would go up to the juggling stall and practice and stuff. So I knew people like Matt and Jim, Matt Ricardo. I knew Dave a little bit at the time. The more juggly of them who I was interested in because I was still a kind of hobby juggler then. Nice guy called Leon, he used to work on the stall. Mikey Martins, who's now a great man, a producer of Hull Freedom Festival, and it's been a good friend to me. Those guys were there, and eventually I did an audition and got a license. And I'd sort of had a vague structure of a show already. And as it happens, I really lucked out because you used to have to do auditions on the inside pitch, and they'd give you like a 10 o'clock show on a Tuesday. And Peter Scott might poke his head out of the window just to see if someone was doing all right and not naked and swearing and pissing off people. And as it happened, I got a show like which was half term, coincidentally, and I got a show which was like maybe 10:30, 11 o'clock, and occasionally that inside pitch, the first show was great, you know, because the public wandered down from the tube and it was the first thing they hit. People weren't really doing shows on James Street at that point. And so if you got that crowd, they were great and they had lots of money in their pocket. So for my audition, I did a really good show. And I was very happy with it. And it took me months before I earned anything like as much money again or did as good a show again. But I felt very comfortable with it. And a few of the times when I was like, first have
what kind of show did you have at that point? Did you learn structure by that point? Were you just juggling and kind of trying to be funny without real knowledge?
I was learning the structure of it because I was watching so many shows. When I first started for my audition and afterwards, I was doing a King Arthur themed juggling show, which ended up with a unicycle, with a 5-foot unicycle. And I would do things like balance a sword, and had some audience participation, some costumes and stuff.
And why did you have costumes? Why go for King Arthur themed? Why do this instead of do the bare bones minimum? That's extra work, surely.
Yeah, because I wanted to be a little bit different and theatrical about it. And ironically, it didn't last long, and I slipped into the bare bones, and the costume sort of fell by the wayside, and it just became a suit like everyone else, really. I had a tweed suit for a long time, which was sort of my thing. And I would do a lot of shows late at night when no one else was around. So I'd sort of wait. I'd do a shift in the museum, and I'd finish there about 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock, and then no one would be left. And at that time, no one wanted to work the rest of the accident, so everyone had gone home. So I would try and do a show then. And funnily enough, I met Chris Lynham at that point, who was sort of doing the same thing. He was trying to do some street shows again after a long break, and he was sort of working in the evening as well. And so I met him quite early on, and it was interesting sort of chatting to him, as someone I knew vaguely through having seen him doing cabaret. So when I was at university, the story I always tell, I went one night to a comedy club in Stoke Newington called the Black Cat Comedy Club. And on the bill that night were Brian Reed, Shandy, and Gareth and Dean doing their show. So it was like a variety club, basically. And it was sort of, when I kind of was interested in street entertainment, but when I saw it indoors like that, it was the first time I'd ever seen Brian do a set. I don't think I'd seen him do a street show then. And it was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. I mean,
I've been told that indoors his work functions perfectly.
He's fucking
all the
brilliant.
problems it has in the street disappear. Well, I think he's brilliant, but then I watch him on the street, and I can see a lot of people that don't think he's brilliant.
I think all the problems he had on the street disappear. It's pushing it slightly. But if the audience bought into it, they absolutely loved him, because a lot of the time, I suppose, as we know, subtle characters get lost on the street. And if Brian's character is a sort of hapless clown, you might just walk past him and think he's shit. But if you buy into that character, suddenly it becomes absolutely hilarious.
Well, and it just seems like a lot of people forget that
10 really killer gags as well that are unique and clever and funny, And so those inside absolutely destroy, because when 50 people are watching them or 100 people are watching them, they're hilarious, Coke can out of the case is hilarious, The Diablo routine's hilarious. The dictaphone thing is hilarious, So I remember all that, even though I didn't know him at the time. So that's how good he must have been,
Yeah. And I take it you met him when you went to Covent Garden.
Yeah, I think he was away actually when I first started, but he came back after a bit. And
what were the peeps like there? Were they supportive? Was the community supportive at that time? Did people take you under their wing, teach you the ropes, show you bits about how to do a show?
They were all right, because I'd sort of been hanging around for a bit at the juggling store, so I knew a handful of people. And I think they were all right because, there was still a bit of a hangover, I think, from the kind of if you're shit, you shouldn't be on this pitch kind of vibe, which I know is a bit more prevalent before the sort of 90s. In the 80s, there was a lot of that. And I think, if you came there with a sort of a formed show, people would give you a lot of time and space, They saw you could do some stuff and draw an edge, and you'd actually looked at some stuff and thought about it, and you had some material, People would give you a lot of time. I can count on the fingers of one hand the times I've had run-ins with people at Covent Garden, which is brilliant, really.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, amazing over all the years, And at the time also, because I was writing this thesis once I dropped out, people were sort of helpful, If you ask them questions.
Yeah. And so how was forming this thesis then? Why did you decide to start developing this? You said you dropped out, so it wasn't explicitly for academic kind of judgment at this point, right?
Yeah, sorry, I've just noticed Alex and Andy Sumpton there. Hello, gentlemen. Nice to see you. Yeah, well, eventually I went back and I sort of paid my fees by doing street shows when I was back at college. And at the end of it, I'd probably been there 4 or 5 years, I guess. Maybe 3 or 4 years in Covent Garden by then. I needed something else to do. Otherwise, I was just earning my money, going to the Essex Serpent, and spending my money, getting up the next day. I mean, in some ways, it was lovely. It had all the things I like: street entertainment, full English breakfasts, pubs, drinking, fun, no responsibility. I was paying dirt cheap rent, and I was having a lovely time. So I was sort of, in a couple of relationships, but also, sort of pretty young and free, and just having a laugh, really. And I think those were the glory days for me, that middle bit of working in Covent Garden, in terms of like enjoying myself. I think the other thing that happened at that point, incidentally, is my show got much more formulaic and less interesting. It earned me a lot.
Can you describe why you think your show was interesting before?
Well, when I first started, if I'd have carried on doing that, I think I would have probably found a way to keep the theatricality of it and make it into a more interesting piece of street entertainment, And I've sort of got a bit of a bugbear about the terms street performance, street theatre, street entertainment. I think they are distinguishable from each other. I prefer to use street entertainment, really. So I think it would have been more interesting and would have been a lot less following the structure and a lot less generic,
Yeah, and you said about distinctions. Can you go into that a little bit more?
What, between those terms?
Yeah, and I'd add one other as well. Street artist is perhaps something I'd add there as well, which I wouldn't just put to painter.
Yeah. For me, I had to distinguish between them when I was writing the thesis, because I had to separate those terms out. So for me, only me, I don't say this is right or wrong, but for me, a busker is the English version of a busker, because it's different in Canada and America, and Australia, I think, is someone who stands as a walk-by act, whether they're a singer or a musician or any kind of performer. That's a busker for me. Street theatre is often commissioned, often doesn't happen on busking pitches, but happens at festivals, in open spaces, in shared common spaces. Sometimes it does happen on pitches, but rarely. And then, street performers and street entertainers tend to be people who are busking, tend to be asking for money at the end of a show, doing circle shows, pulling an edge forwards, with a recognized structured piece of street entertainment, whether it's a juggling show, a mime show, a dance show, any of that. And so I call those street performers, and then I would say the street entertainment is more a kind of umbrella term for all of it, really. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah,
and did I do a thesis? I did a thesis because I needed something to do while I was doing that, because I was sort of wasting my time, really. And I was really interested in the history of it, really interested in the history of it. So
I can empathize.
I wrote this.
Wow, check that out, everyone.
There you go. 10,000 words. Very much ignored by the publishing world, sadly. But it was really good to do, and it was a useful thing. And I was interested sort of almost all the time I was doing it until I had to actually write the thing up at the end, which became a pain in the ass. But,
I can imagine. And what were the things you started learning? What did you learn about our world as you started gathering this information?
Well, I was trying to find out, first of all, the factual history of what happened in London at the time. So I sort of narrowed it down to that. But also, I was much more interested in not just doing shows at Covent Garden, but other British pitches as well. So, so I would do most of my stuff at Covent Garden, but I also tried to do things elsewhere. And because I was equally interested in the stuff that was happening in, you know, Bath or Stratford or York or Chester or Brighton or the places where people were doing busking shows. And, you know, they had most of those places had a very different pace and a different style of show to Covent Garden, you know. So, for example, one of the people I talked to in the book was Noel Britton, and you know, as he'll say, he wasn't one of the first. He was one of the first, but not the first to work that part of the pitch. But you know, he says at the time, and you had Haggis on it before, which was great. You know, Haggis and Charlie would walk across the pitch at Bath with a unicycle, and they would have a train of people following them because they were so excited about what they were going to do. You know. Which is a far cry from one man standing with a unicycle at Covent Garden, desperately trying to stop 6 people, isn't it? You know. So it's really,
very much so.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that, and all those pitches formed in different ways and had different styles. You know, there was a guy called Paul who used to do a juggling act called Flipside, which is Scottish Paul. He was a lovely guy, and whenever we didn't get a show, we'd go off somewhere like. We go to Cambridge, we go to Oxford, or we go to Stratford, or we go, you know, wherever we could. And, you know, when we went to Stratford, we had a terrible time because our shows were shouty, hypey, Covent Garden-y. You know, Paul was better than me at it because he had a lot more experience in Australia building crowds and stuff. But Gary, who you had on as well, would do this long, funny, slow bill. Basically, he wouldn't really even touch the audience. He'd just let them form wherever they were, you know. Whereas we were desperately trying to get people to move in because we knew a packed edge would make a better show. It didn't. We just didn't have the material to stretch it out and charm them, you know. Yeah. And that is part of the thing, really, I think. All those other pitches, you know, Andy Stumpton will tell you in York, the more charming the act, you've got a lot more focus in those places. You know, there's not a million other things going on to distract you most of the time. So if you can charm people and make them laugh, they're quite happy to sit in that relaxed environment and watch. It was the same in Bath as well, you know, and it was the same in the early days of Edinburgh at the Mount as well, you know. Yeah. So yeah.
So what was it like once you'd written it? Did you get acclaim? Were people interested? Did you get other busking organisations, different buskers asking for copies of this? Did it change your life writing this thesis?
It didn't change my life. It got me a degree, a master's degree, but I've never used it. But a lot of people wanted to read it. A lot of people read it. You know, it made me talk to people I wouldn't otherwise talk to. So, you know, it helped me to meet people like Sam and Andy. And, you know, it made me go to Edinburgh and meet, you know, all those people who in the early days were so instrumental for me, you know, Aileen and Alex and John, who I didn't know from Covent Garden actually, but I knew them in Edinburgh, you know, Doug Dougal and, you know, there's a whole rake of people who I would see when I went up to the early days of the Mound. and enjoyed that relaxed atmosphere, you know. And there was always a sort of malaise coming back from Edinburgh to come back to Covent Garden in September, because it was like, oh yeah, it's really hard again, and people want to walk off again, and you know, I'm not as funny down here as I was up there, you know. And to be honest, it was watching that sort of variety of shows that made me change what I do a little bit. So it finally made me force myself to get a finale that was mine and no one else did, and drop the unicycle. So that happened up not long, actually. It was only like maybe 2 or 3 years after I started.
And why did you feel like you were compelled to do that after this experience?
Because it always niggled me that my show was formulaic. You know, I'd watched, you know, people like Dave Evans were so good to me that my show essentially became a stripped down version of that with less skills, you know. And that's not my character. Our characters are totally different. So, you know, it was healthier for me to try and do things which were mine, you know. So eventually when I found a sort of broad character and a costume and stuff, you know. So I found the Union Jack shorts and string vest and sock suspenders and stuff pretty early when I was learning to do the pier trick. And it just all slotted into place, knotted hanky, and, you know. And when you do something different like that, people on pitches are much more interested, and they sort of, you know, people like Matt and Jim and Dave and Brian and people would offer you suggestions that you would be a fool not to listen to, you know. So to be honest, like half the lines that are good in my show are probably suggested by other people, because they've gone, oh, that thing with a tube, you should say this, or that thing with a glass would be funnier if you did this, you know. And that I've always really appreciated that sort of
community workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's only what you would do if you were rehearsing a theatre show. You know, for those people, and I don't disparage them at all, but for those people who are street entertainers with Arts Council grants, they have the luxury of rehearsing those shows and being directed, you know, and finding that material in an inorganic way, you know. So Pickens first said to me, oh, well, you know, first 100 shows, that's when you kind of get it sorted. And it's kind of like, yeah, if you are a busking, grindy street entertainer, absolutely right. And in some ways, that's a great way to learn. But there are shortcuts to it, make your performance softer, I suppose, you know.
Yeah, and also as well, you know, not everybody speaks in the way you do about, and this isn't just you, obviously, there's other people that do this, but particularly speaking to you now, you started by doing characters, and then you felt happy with yourself later on by refining the ability to put more character into work. It was something you were interested in. It was something you wanted to drive towards. It seems obvious, at least from my perspective, that you wanted to drive towards that. Other people don't have that drive. You know, that's personal to you.
I tell you what happens, I think, is that when you start doing shows in different places, you start doing more indoor and more festivals, and people start booking you for things, you begin to feel conscious of the material that you have. And, you know, you can get away with doing the same show, more or less, for 20 or 30 years on the street. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. You know, I think there's a virtue in that. However, when you go to places and you see a lot of different entertainment, so Glastonbury, hello, Will. Glastonbury, where Will has worked in the early days of the outside circus stage where I performed, was instrumental in that for me. Because when I started comparing there, I had to find things to say because I was on for 6 hours a day. And no prick will do their time at Glastonbury. You know, they're booked for half an hour and they do 20 minutes. You know, you ask Gareth about the time when a certain act came up to me and went, I can't do my show today. I'm very tired. It's kind of like, Jesus, it's the Sunday of Glastonbury. Everyone's been up for 96 hours. You're going to do your show. And so, you know, with the exception of Rumple, everybody would do. Everybody would do less than their time. So you, as a compere, you had to find what's going on.
Yeah. And so that helped a lot then. So that made you, because I've done a little bit of comparing a festival sometimes, and it does feel like there's not as much instant pressure as you'd have in a comedy club being a compare. They are a little bit more forgiving. So was that a chance to experiment and to play with talking and to develop up this material and develop your character?
I think those kind of places were where I learned how to do stuff that wasn't just. I mean, I was always keen on improvising in street shows, but it taught me to go out on stage with no props and just try to make funny situations. And the characters,
which is weirdly terrifying, eh?
Yeah, it is. The first few times, it's awful, you know. And I used to go with a huge case of stuff, you know. And after a couple of years, I just didn't take the case anymore because I didn't need it, you know. And interestingly, the characters that I do now, you know, if I do the fitness thing or the bingo thing or some music stuff as well, could only have come out of that trying to find things to do to kill time at Glastonbury, you know. And also, as Will will tell you, those acts are so varied. Hello, Brian. You missed me being nice about you. I'm not going to do it now you're here. All those acts at Glastonbury are so varied that, for the most part, that you're inspired by them, and you don't want to be going out with 3 clubs in a unicycle on a stage like that. You know, you want to be doing something inspirational, fun. So when I used to watch people like Stompy doing shows at Glastonbury that would go on for ages and were absolutely fucking hilarious, you know, just chaotic and wonderful and experimental, and, you know, just the raw talent of it and the balls of it was exceptional. And when you see people like Flick and James, you know, doing Bramble and the risks they take and the material that they do, you know, it's a very pure form of improvisation that you don't get anywhere else. You can't really see it inside because there's nowhere else where you have the time frame in which to dick around like that, you know. You know, when you think about an act like Bramble at Glastonbury that have a 3-hour slot, you know, you're not going to find a theatre show that improvises around a very loose structure for 3 hours, you know. If you do, it's more a 60s or 70s experimental show that the like of which you don't see so much.
Yeah. No, and I suppose it's because as well there's a sort of, in a venue, there's a pressing thing to deliver what's supposed to be delivered. You've paid to come into this venue, you've paid for a product, you have to get this product. Whereas the nature of a larger festival is you've paid to be here.
Yeah.
And then the experience is provided for you. So it's not, the product itself doesn't have to be one thing. It can be amorphic, you know, it can change and move, and the show can be different.
Absolutely. And even within the structure of a street show, the people that I always like to watch, you know, I got bored of watching formulaic shows very quickly or samey shows very quickly. And the people that I like to watch were people who had that very loose structure and did different things all the time, you know. So I used to love to watch Living Place or, you know, Herbie or Pepe. When Pepe was on form, he was amazing, absolutely amazing, you know. You know, I remember Keno doing massive shows on the West Piazza. You know,
was that in '91 when you began, or was that when you were?
That was when I was. That was when I was watching younger. I mean, interestingly, one of the things I looked up here is I couldn't quite remember it. But when I talked to Maggie Pinhorn, who started Alternative Arts, which was the company that reopened the piazza after the fruit market closed. You know, there were other performers there as well. People have different memories of it. But what she and some other people did do was they were able to talk about the acts that were there. So I've got a list here of late 70s Covent Garden acts and what they did.
Wow.
Then I've got mid-80s acts, and then I've got acts on a random day when I was working. And what I was trying to do at the time was I was trying to make a point about how everyone did the same stuff now, including me. So, do you want me to read these? It's quite interesting, I think.
Please, by all means.
So this is a combination of Maggie's memories and people like Tim Batt and Andy Sinclair and Paddy and Rob and so yeah, late 70s, Mike Reed, guitarist, Poogie Snackenberger, street band, Terry Sinclair, Gutter Brothers, who are a skiffle band, the Vulcans, who are the Vulcans who played improvised instruments, Jay Arthur, who was a musician, Tim Batt, who's a juggler, Mr. Dandridge and Mr. Adams, Chris and Alex, who are a juggling act, George, variety calypso bicycle act, JJ Waller, comedy strongman, Sid Rasputin, who's John McKenna, who you've got on later in the week, Escapologist, bucket of water, manacles, Mike Mulkerrin, comedy magician, Ari Pavarotti, Andre, who's brilliant, who you had on, Charlie, Nickelodeon, dance, mime, melodrama, John Ballinger, jester, Antibodies, Australian mime statue, John Lenihan, magician, Chris Lynham, clown, Mac McDonald, human jukebox, Amazing Mendezes, who a lot of people talk about as a great juggling act. Randolph the Remarkable is a funny man called Phil. He went on to be Julian Clary's assistant, put his belly in a bowl of water. Vicious Boys, Andy Smart, who became a great improviser, stand-up. Greatest Show on Legs, Malcolm Hardy, and Savast Robot, Nebula, who was Andy Sinclair, Robotics, Ozzy's Crew, Breakdance. So that's sort of, in the early days coming up to the 80s. Then mid-80s, on top of some of those who were still there, Swing Masters, guitar and skiffle fiddle. Klingons, who are a psychobilly band, used to play the Transport Museum, that I remember really strongly, Irish psychobilly band. John Waddell, guitar player. Rob, Admiral Benberg doing the knife throwing. Cool Shades, John and Paddy, who were doing stuff. There's John McKenna and Tim Batt. There's John. And there's Tim
Look at the flip-flops.
Yeah. There's Chris and Alex. There's Chris. There's Alex.
He's got more hair there, hasn't he?
The young Alex Dandridge. There's Pino running the pillar.
Wow. I mean, look at that. What a picture.
There's Eddie doing a show.
Wow.
So, yeah, mid-80s. Mike and Melvin. Comedy, horse racing, sound dance. Melvin Outward, that is. And Mike Howe, obviously. Luke, rhythmic, gymnastic, magic. Eddie Izzard, Nicholas doing magic. Dominic, the Vox man, doing his Inside the Vox act. Duncan Trillo, who I remember as a kid. I remember watching him on the inside pitch and doing productions, hard productions. And he'd always turn around to the people standing behind him. Don't tell anyone what's going on, Brilliant. Yeah. Dave Brown, who was a really good comedy magician. Like, very funny. Original Mixture, who were Mitch and Andy, who do newspaper.
Mitch Mitchell. Yeah, he's coming up soon on the cast. Just waiting to get a day for him.
Great.
Oh, Mitchy boy.
Brian Reed. Patricia. Drunken lady character comedy. And so there was all that stuff. 15th of February 1997, when I was doing a show that day. Great Dave, unicycle and juggling. Lucky Jim, unicycle and juggling. Richard Garrity, unicycle and juggling. Alan Hooligan, unicycle and juggling. Matt Barnard, comedy juggling. Giovanni, comedy juggling. Mighty Garrett, comedy juggling. John H, comedy juggling. Hump James, straight jacket and chains. Adrian Love, straight jacket and chains. Sophie, straight jacket and chains. Nick Malinowski, straight jacket. Pepe, microphone. Rob, Paddy, and Ozzy. Those were the people who just happened to be there that day. So, those who claim it was more varied in the early days were probably right.
Can't talk, sorry.
Those who claim it was more varied were probably right. I mean, it comes and goes, but
I'll be honest, that was one of my postulations when I began this, was that, you know, I call the 80s a golden period, because it seems like there was so many different acts, and even the acts that had similar stuff did it in different ways, and it's very creative, and it seems like people had a real different direction they were going at the work from their own perspectives. And then when I began working up until now, it seems like we've all got, it seems like we have the same beats, you know, the same rhythm. Every single show has the same kind of dynamic that's evolved. And I wondered why. Why did they have creativity then and you don't have it now? And it does appear like the formula is really developed over 40 years. And that over the 40 years, through the people working on the pitches and being nice people, working together, developing each other's work, we've found this perfect formula for shows. And now kids don't bother about learning how to do it. They just learn that formula and then get proficient at that, I suspect, at least.
Yes, I think there's definitely elements of that. I think there were more influences in those early days because the sort of routes to get to those street entertainment shows came from so many different places. So for example, you know, Ozzy's Crew, which resulted in Ozzy and Melvin and Shandy doing shows for years and years afterwards. You know, you would find breakdancing troupes out on high streets throughout England, you know, and massively in America, certainly in New York and LA, on Venice Beach. And they would be collecting money just as breakdancers, you know. But as time went on, and they became, you know, reliant on the money, it became necessary to formulate a show out of what they were doing. You know, because it stopped being something fun they could do at the weekends and, you know, a social zeitgeist thing and something to impress people and stuff. And people had seen it a lot more. So I think probably in the early days, they would throw money at something like that. They'd never seen it. You know, whereas later on it had to be wrapped up in something. So they all found their own ways to do that, you know. Because if you look at USA breakdancers today, or you look at any of the big kind of dance acts, they're really doing comedy shows, you know.
Yeah.
There's very little dance in it. You know, there's little bits of acrobatic, you know, and that stuff kind of has its roots in 70s breakdancing. It has its roots in Electric Boogaloo and Beat Street, and you know, the time when every kid had an aerosol in their school bag because they wanted to go out and display pieces and stuff. You know? So that's one tiny aspect. Then you've got the kind of music hall queue entertainers, stroke circus acts, you know, who found a route into it that way. And then when Covent Garden started, a lot more political theatre, experimental theatre, alternative comedy that was being done on the street, you know. John Hegley was doing it at the time, you know, Two Marks were doing it at the time. Street theatre companies were booked in for weeks on end in the early days, you know, to do sometimes political shows, sometimes experimental, avant-garde and surrealist shows, you know.
Well, this is something I find interesting as a postulation. Is maybe alternative art being in Covent Garden at the beginning was positive on the creativity there because they bring in acts that would be from different places. They book acts in that wouldn't necessarily be street acts, and it would influence the street acts around them. It would influence them to do things that they wouldn't have otherwise thought about, just as an insular group.
Well, that was one of the things that I talked to people about in the thesis. So it very much depends who you talk to about. I'm sure John McKenna would have a take on it because I think him and Maggie were close and worked together quite a lot. Whereas I think
I'll be interested.
A lot of the original buskers who came along in the sort of years afterwards got frustrated with her putting out too much time on the pitch, etc., etc. So obviously I wasn't there. I've got no idea, but I can only draw conclusions from here, you know.
Yeah.
And
so your personal journey. I mean, it's fascinating talking about this stuff, but I know you want to keep it we said we were going to do an hour today, and hopefully you don't mind spinning over a little bit more than an hour. A lot of the time, I think people are surprised at how much time it takes to explain things. Time flies. Can we draw back to your story then? So you've done this dissertation, you're working on your show. The next few years after you've done this dissertation, you start bringing kind of character work back into your show. Am I right in thinking that?
Not so much. I did a lot more straight indoor entertainment first. So I did a show for a long time, which was on Tottenham Court Road, in a space which is now Spearmint Rhino, in a place called the Embassy Rooms, which was a dinner show for tourists. It was called the Cockney Cabaret. And it was a production show with songs and dances, and it had a comedy act in it, 20 minutes. And a guy called Pete Matthews, who's a cruise ship juggler now, did it first of all. Dave Evans did it after that, and I did it after Dave.
Did Dave pass you the gig? Was it a friendly thing of I'm moving, do you want this kind of thing?
Yeah, pretty much. I think he'd had enough and wanted to give it to someone. And I did that 3 nights a week, sometimes 4 nights a week for years, until it kind of ground to a halt. And at the same time I was doing cruise ships, I was doing holiday parks, and as many gigs as I could take, really. So I was working less and less at Covent Garden because I was earning money elsewhere.
Did you prefer working on the stage stuff? Were you frustrated with the street?
It was earning me more money. I was having lots of late nights because I was out playing poker a lot at the time, and so I was getting up late, so I would often not make the draw. And also, I kind of liked knowing where my money was going to come from. And, if I was self-conscious about the material that I was doing, it felt a lot better to be doing stuff indoors where I could try a few things, or I would be the only act on, so it wouldn't embarrass me to be doing the same old tired stuff. And I think
did you...
So.
Yeah, did you? It's fine, mate. We talked about the lag and this kind of thing before. It's okay. Did you find were you getting anxious with the hat when you're working on the street? Then is this the thing where when you speak about regular money being nice, people talk about the stress of street performance?
Well, what happened to all of me and my contemporaries, I think most of us, is we became conscious of what we were all learning, which is sort of a mistake, really. You shouldn't be comparing yourself to other people and what they're earning. So. My sort of my mates at the time, my contemporaries were Dave and Hunt James and Matt Ricardo and Adrian and Paddy and Matt and Jim and Pete Wardell and Herbie, and then I was friendly with other tribes in Covent Garden who we didn't hang out with so much, but. Pepe and Windsor and Richie and Chef and Shane and those guys, they're a different group of people, but I got on well and had respect for them, And when you're aware of what other people are earning, I think it really screws up your head. And actually, I think you'd be much better off not knowing that someone's just done 200 quid in their last show. Because you might have done an 80 quid hat and you were perfectly happy with the way it went because you did 60 things in it, And we all know people who just get pissed off because they feel like they're not getting paid what they should be getting paid. And
but also as well, the horrible truth of the street is that people don't get paid what they deserve on the street. It's not about what people deserve. That's not the way it works.
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, do they? But I think the idea of a good show being a big show or a strong show, is ridiculous. And when I see people saying he's got a massive show, and not even saying what he or she does in that show, you go, wow, you've really lost your way, You've really lost your way from...
Well, you think when they say they've got... Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. Please carry on.
I think you've really lost your way when you think about why you first became a street entertainer, It wasn't because you thought...
Well, this is...
It wasn't because you thought you could churn out the same old stuff time and time again to maximise your profits. It was because you enjoyed it,
exactly that.
And you enjoyed making a few quid doing what you loved.
Exactly that. A big show could just be a big speaker doing nothing, being really loud, drawing people in. A big show could be, setting a pyre on fire and saying, everyone come and look. It's a big spectacle, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's anything to it. You said the shows you mentioned that you enjoyed aren't necessarily the biggest packing shows around. They're the interesting shows. They're content.
And when I started to go to Europe and do some stuff there, watching people out there like, I don't know, Peter Post or Dave Fred or, companies doing shows at European festivals that were funny and you had time and space and were still, interesting and innovative and, admittedly, a lot of the time they were being paid. They didn't have to keep that edge, but, and I had moments where after I stopped working by myself, I started doing shows with a lovely guy called Matt Barnard, and he used to work with Dave Pickens. And we had a show that we took to Limburg, which is a big street theatre festival. And just wasn't good enough to be there, really. We were doing shows in stadiums for like 1,500, 2,000 people, and it was like, it wasn't a strong enough show, Afterwards, there would be Leo Bassi doing, his incredible stuff, and really flipping the audience on their heads. And we'd be trying to do a little joke with a camera cap, It's like that stuff. We weren't ready for that. These days, I think, it's easier to know when you're suited for those sort of things, So but I had a lovely time doing that.
And why do you think? Yeah. Why do you think you were picked for it then? Was it because you had good promo? Was it the Covent Garden thing that sold you past perhaps where you were ready to be? Or
that one, he saw us do a good show somewhere, and he probably saw 20 minutes of it where it was going really well, and booked us on the strength of that. I mean, we didn't die a horrible death. We just weren't as good as the rest. Like, I remember at that festival, the Desperate Men, who are a company based in Bristol. They're a street theatre company who don't busk as such, but they've done a lot of interesting and diverse stuff over the years. They're doing a show about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. 2 men, 2 women in the show. And it was a great show. It was a proper piece of street theatre, It was reflexive of the space in which it was performed. It interacted with its audience, It had good, funny routines and scary effects, and it was great, and it was massive, There are there's a fox on our garage roof. He's just, I could just see him. Did you see anything? Anyway, so yeah, those kind of big spectacle shows, Royal Deluxe, for example, doing massive interactive stuff. All that stuff is amazing, and rightfully, in my mind, is funded when they perform and they do effective entertainment like that, And it's a million miles away from the sort of stuff that we do when we are busking, It's been a long time since I've done any real busking, but there's a place for all that stuff, and it's all outdoor entertainment in the same way that, those street musicians are coming to their own, haven't they now? In a post entertainment sphere,
Now is their time. So when you came back from Europe, did you change your work then? Did you come back from seeing all this stuff there and think, Christ, I wanna mold what I do more?
Well, the more I spent doing shows elsewhere, I think the less I wanted to do busking shows as such. And so the more I just did book stuff. So I worked for Fool's Paradise pretty much solidly for, 10, 15 years, getting booked out. And also doing other things, obviously in the last 10, 12 years, I've done Slightly Fat features, as a touring show. You talked to John about that. But
yeah, and so what was that like? Do you want to talk about the experience of it? I also, as well, I do want to talk about your Full Paradise stuff, because I saw the whole plethora of different characters you do. And most people you see, they'll pick a couple of things and they'll stick to it. And you and Soapy have so many different things you do. I just don't know what's the right order to talk about doing slightly fat stuff or talk about developing the stuff you have and presenting in Fool's Paradise. I'd leave it up to you, but I want to talk about both if I can.
Well, we have done a couple of more theatrical shows for Fools, which get booked and paid for, so they don't need to be hardcore busking shows. So we've done like a show based on the 12 Tasks of Hercules. We've done a medicine show with old-timey medicine bottles, and they always have a streety flair. And if you were watching it, you'd probably say it was more a busky show than most of the stuff. But you just have that little bit more license. And then we've done Pint of Beer, Escapology, good, solid, dependable, gets booked a lot because it sort of attracts a crowd in most spaces, you know. So a lot of the time for bookers, they think that's great because you've held 50, 100 people for half an hour. And in their eyes, that's just what you're there for, you know. Whereas actually, there's just as much merit in 20 people watching something more theatrical and 30 people watching 5 minutes and then wandering off, you know. So we do those. We do a few walkabout characters, footmen, golfers, you know. And we've done a lot of different stuff over the years. Necessarily.
Do you have a writerly process? Do you and Gareth sit in a workshop and sort of chew pencils and go, we must get new ideas? Or do you do it on the spot? What's your process for doing stuff?
The Pint of Beer and the Escapology show is just a bastardized version of our street show. So it will be very familiar to anyone who knows a familiar street show. And
their way around a circle show.
With a few tweaks, yeah. The others, yeah, we have. We've talked about it a lot. We've rehearsed it and tried it out in different places. And we've done sort of smaller versions of some of them indoors or in slightly fat shows. And it's sort of grown a little bit from there. Not very much, to be honest. And those shows sort of, you know, they get booked less because they're less dependable. But sometimes they're much more fun to do given the right situation, you know. And yeah, they have a standard sort of show devising process. You try stuff out, you write a skeleton script, you improvise around it. And as we know, people have different ways of working. You know, a lot of street performers prefer to try things out live rather than writing them. They just want to keep doing them over and over until they can tweak it and tweak it and tweak it, you know. A lot of people want to write it down and then do that tweaking at a later place, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you're thinking about the character stuff, I know some performers will do things like they'll look at other things that are being booked and they'll think, right, this is hot in the market. We need to make sure we have this character. And then they present a show with that character. Is there an element of that? Do you look at what's bookable and try and figure out, we need to produce something in the end to be booked. We want people to pay for it to be there. We need to look at what people are paying for right now and make something appropriate.
If we were more clever, we would do that. I've tried to do it a little bit by creating Victorian circus workshops and Victorian juggler with Dickens quotes, and you know, I've done gardeners and I've done sea captains, and I've done lots of different stuff which people have asked me to improvise stuff at events. Yeah. And that's been sold to a few different places afterwards. But essentially that is just me in a costume improvising, really. And then me and Joan, you know, we're not hard working enough to do the thing where we've got a heritage act, we've got a nightclub act, we've got a sea shanty act, we've got, you know, we don't have 15 different acts. A lot of people who get a lot of had a lot of street entertainment books work have all those things, you know. So if you say we've got a gardening event coming up, what have you got? They'll have 3 different gardening, you know. So and some of those people are brilliant.
Which makes sense.
It always depends on the individual performer, doesn't it? You know, I mean, everybody knows if you put someone funny, in a costume, they'll probably find something funny
Yeah,
out of that situation.
yeah,
For the most part, and that's often the nicest way to watch people work, isn't it? But there's merit the other way around as well. I saw Noel's comedy
and
walk
so
about 2-3 years ago, and I'd seen it about 20 years before, and it was pretty much the same. I think it'd be fair to say it was almost exactly the same, and it was still brilliant. It was still a brilliant, literal, hilarious piece of outdoor theatre. Site-specific promenade theatre, if you want to be fancy about it. It's a great comedy walk,
Yeah.
And it's been the same for years and years.
So. And, you watch Only Fools and Horses and you still laugh, and you've watched it 20 times, and that's even more of a push there. You've watched that production over and over again and still find it funny, and these people are watching it for the first time. It's just different bloody people,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
quality lasts, eh?
Yeah, maybe the trick is trying to retain an element of what is effective in the first place, So when people watch slightly fat shows, they always say, "Oh, it's so great the way that you talk to the audience, and it's good family-friendly entertainment, and it's like it's great that people recognise that, and what they're actually saying is we deliver comedy in a way which is familiar to them, and is effective, I suppose, in the different sort of sketches that we do,
Well, it's effective, and I mean, I watched a feature show. I've watched a couple of feature shows, in fact, and I've enjoyed every one. And one of the things I liked about it is something that Street Show has in particular, potentially, not all. I think my Street Show, for example, has an exclusive element because I'm a bit mean sometimes. I do some harsh material, but the Street Show that's done well, the stage show that you guys do, it's not exclusive. Everybody can enjoy it. It's not like you have to be into a certain thing to be there. It's entertaining on its own values,
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, it's it's been. I think I've done some of the best stuff that I've done in slightly fat shows, and we've had great shows and we've had some not so good shows, but it's a pretty unique combination of people, really, and the way that people.
From your perspective, how did it begin?
Well, it began. I watched John talking about it. It sort of began by Grommy putting shows on in his local theatre and forming a hardcore troupe of people that he wanted to work with, and us taking that show further and further. Grommy always drove it, and Grommy took all the risks, artistically and financially. And he's a brilliant performer and a really hard worker. So that combination makes for a great opportunity. And then the rest of us are, Rob's a genius magician, and I'd like to think that all the rest of us have our strengths in different places, and enjoy working together for the most part. We get on each other's tits when we're touring, like any group of people, but for the most part, it's really nice to work with those people, and you can be pretty much guaranteed that if you're on a stage with them, you're not going to feel lost because they are able to cope with whatever's happening, And so improvisationally, it's great. And when we have enough time to run routines in to get them really good, I think they become really effective. So the first show that we did in Edinburgh, which we then took to Montreal, we probably did it 30 times in Edinburgh and 50 times in Montreal or something, became a really strong show, And when we did it anywhere, it was very, very tight. And that's a pleasure because as soon as it's that tight, you can start to dick around with it and know that in 2 minutes you'll be back within the flow of it. And so it won't have gaps that are going to be too wincy,
Yeah. Is there something about
when we built new material, we had to take risks, and that became stronger and stronger as well, So it's great.
Is there something about the fact that you guys all worked on the street together? Majority of you, I think Gafombi was on the street as well, wasn't he?
Gronwy used to work in Covent Garden with a guy called Little Nick, who became a security guard, and where they were very strong.
Little Nick, I've met him in a barbecue.
There you go. They worked the cruise ships together, and Gron carried on working ever since then. So, but he worked in a lot of other places. He worked in York and in Sheffield, and he's a great street entertainer. In fact, him and Richard's show now is, it's a really, really strong piece of street entertainment, and gets booked rightfully for that. The other people in the show as well, John is great. John's paintings are brilliant, and he's not afraid to try stuff, and some of the stuff that he tries becomes really effective. Gareth is like, I've always said, like, the thing about Gareth is he just always gives it 100%. And you'll notice that if you see him doing a street show, you can watch people walking out of Covent Garden to do a show, and they look like they don't want to be there. And Gareth always looks like he's in control. And if you're in a double act with him, you know that he's always got your back. And so he's amazing like that. And he's funny and he's fearless. Richard's a brilliant performer, and as a character performer for Wayne Marvell and stuff is amazing. Herbie is unique and a genius in many ways, and does stuff, love him or hate him, and most people love him. The stuff that he does touches people deeply, when he's doing songs and when he's doing skits and stuff, so that group of people, are a pleasure to work with. You've frozen, Matt. I don't know if you've frozen permanently, but you probably have. So I'm going to talk to Will. Yeah, Sunday. I made it to the Sunday. Amazing. Dandridge, Andy Sumpton, and Errol Whiteley. Have we got a tip jar? I don't think Matt has a tip jar. I could be wrong. I'm sure he'll tell you a way that he can get paid. I think he might pop up again in a minute. I'm going to go through the list of things that I wanted to mention and see what I haven't mentioned yet. Oh, yeah. Wanted to mention going to look for Cellini, who's the kind of lost link in the... there he is. He's back.
So I heard the name Cellini being mentioned.
Yeah. It was one of the things I wrote down to think about, because when I was working in Covent Garden, Cellini was one of those, acts that people talked about. And he hadn't been to Britain for years, certainly not doing street shows. So we heard he was working in Amsterdam on the street. So me and Herbie and Pete Waddell just sort of got on a ferry and went to Amsterdam to try and find him, and ended up doing some shows on the Lides of Playing. And then we did find him that trip, but we eventually ran into him back in London at a magic convention. And maybe we did. My brain is foggy from that trip. But, you're talking about sort of groups of people who, work regular pitches together. Those boys who were working in Amsterdam at the time. And they were all boys, because there weren't, I don't think, any women working that pitch regularly, as far as I'm aware, but I could well be wrong. So please correct me if I am.
Tomorrow was working at one point, but I don't know what era.
Sure, maybe a little bit after that. So those boys used to do individual shows, and they used to have the lighter gag with a jar of lighters.
Are you talking about the Dutchman?
I'm talking about a group of performers, neither of which were the Flying Dutchman, but maybe 4 or 5 performers, Frank and Bert and a couple of others. They used to do a group show called the Spice Boys. But in their individual shows, they used to have the lighter jar for the joke. And they'd all use it in their individual shows, but they'd just take it in turns to bring it in because it was so big.
And just in case people don't know what the joke is, can you just let people know what the joke is very quickly?
So you'd ask for a lighter from the audience because you were going to light a cigarette. And when you got the lighter from the audience, you'd produce a huge jar of lighters, unscrew it, put it in the jar, put it back. And that was the joke. And actually, I did a show with Paul Zenon a few years ago who told me that he came up with that gag because he was doing a promotion for lighters on the Isle of Wight, and he stole 200 lighters from the thing and had a jar of lighters, and that's how that joke started. So I don't know if that's a happy accident or whether that's very...
Did he time date that?
I don't remember how long ago he said it was. We'd have to ask him.
Because I am very interested in this lineage of material, because for one thing, we do write fairly obvious stuff. As a community of street performers, we have to. The nature of the art form creates an imperative to write stuff that's easy to understand. And so the material we tend to do a lot of the time, we don't quote Nietzsche in the middle of a routine, you know, where we're not talking about 17th century philosophy or whatever. We talk at broad, simple strokes. So taking someone's lighter and then putting it in a bag or putting it in a jar is something that could be independently thought of, right?
It could be. I mean, the chances are when it's seen by other street entertainers on other pitches, it's not. They probably nicked the joke. But, you know, tracing stuff back is interesting. When I was doing this, there used to be a Punch and Judy guy called Percy Press at Covent Garden. Sort of mid-80s, I guess, maybe early 90s. His dad was a street magician in the 30s and 40s, and he gave me his memoirs. And he used to work markets, Leather Lane, Petticoat, and he used to work on Hampstead Heath, Tower London, you know, all those places. And he used to do cups and balls, and he used to produce a guinea pig from under the cup at the end of it. He used to do it with potato.
Wow.
Yeah. I eventually gave them.
And this is before. Is this before Cellini? Is it before Gazza? This is before Nick. This is
in the 1930s and 40s. Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, cups and balls is as old as the hills, as any magician will tell you. And, you know, most modern street magicians use Guy Vernon's routine. But, you know, there's a lot of influences of that stuff. So anyway, I mean, I don't know enough about it. But what I was saying about lines is that, you know, that line, you know, come up to the line, it's just a left and a right and your body will follow, you know. And that other line, which is like, where are you
left
from?
Foot, right foot, and the body will follow above you. Yeah.
Yeah, where are you from? You know, I'm from Brighton. Oh, that's 80 miles away. Well, the last 3 feet won't make much difference then, will it? So those two jokes.
Yeah.
Those two jokes I heard when I worked at Covent Garden. I also heard them in a mock auction on Oxford Street when I was a teenager, where they bang out electrical goods and they try and get people forwards.
Yeah.
And they're in those memoirs.
Wow.
So those lines are going back to the 40s, for example, you know.
But then we reach this, there's the difficulty, isn't there, between it being a line which is kind of possessed and written by someone, and where's the cutoff to it being normal comment? Oh, hello, hello. I said hello at the beginning of my show for 10 years. Rip off. You know, where do you draw the line? Where does it become a piece of written material, and then where's it just normal conversation? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think people like to muddy that because it makes them feel better.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what I'm doing.
I think for the most part, you know where you get the lines in your show from. For the most part. And I think you pretty much remember when you've made up a line. You pretty much remember when you've nicked it. You might not remember where you nicked it from. And you might think it's a generic line, but, you know, someone wrote it. As Noel Britton would say, you know, he used to get very pissed off with people stealing his lines because he went through a lot of pain writing stuff, collecting stuff from different sources, you know, etc., etc. And, you know, you go with people like Gazzo, for example, who obviously came up with a shitload of material himself, you know, and has used old magicians' lines and tricks and formulas to do stuff as well. So some people are just more creative than others, aren't they? You know, we know people who've never written a line in their lives. We know people who don't have an original part of their show, but they do it really well, you know. And for the most part, I suppose most people's shows have some of their own material, some things they've probably picked up by accident, and some things they've just nicked off it. I mean, if I were to go through my standard street show, I could probably tell you where I got most of it from, or which bits I made up myself, you know. And I'd like to
You
think
can do
that
your it's footnotes basically.
yeah,
Footnote your show.
I'd like to think there were less nick bits these days, but you know, every so often I hear myself saying a line and I wince afterwards because I go, "You didn't really need to say it," you know. And it happens to me when I'm nervous or tired or I need to make something work in a difficult situation. You know, if I feel I'm losing the energy of the audience, then I'll pull out an old line and hate myself for it. Whereas in those venues where we've talked about, like if I'm on stage at Glastonbury or on stage in Slightly Fat or whatever, I'll often find something new to cover that awkwardness, or
because you're not feeling the same or may the fact that the pool to be drawn upon feels different. It doesn't feel like it's the right context for you to draw upon that pool, maybe.
I think there's that, and also because you're not desperate to keep people and make them pay money at you. So that way, you know, the idea of a circle show is a difficult one because unless you're good enough to charm those people to stay, or wow them into staying, or trick them into staying, then, you know, they're not going to stay. And as all street entertainers know, you know, you can promise them something and they'll probably hang around for that. Or you can show them a setup for something, which is why a straitjacket is such a great thing, because once you're in it, they want to see you get out of it, you know. Or you can just keep making them laugh. And if they're having a great time, then they'll stay anyway, you know.
Can I ask this question? It's a statement made to me by people. And it's a statement that I disagree with instinctually. But I'm just interested in what you feel about it. And you've done so much research. You're probably better positioned than anyone to talk about it. The statement is, and I don't feel this, but this is a statement, art cannot be done on the street.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think there's plenty of art on the street. And it's such a ridiculous catch-all statement that it sort of doesn't bear analysis.
Well, I'll draw context down on it just to try and get a bit more information from you. In terms of circle shows and trying to create artistry in there, character work, subtext, metaphor, trying to make what is more of a theatre style show, street theatre show, into a circle show. People claim it can't be done. Some people claim it can't be done. It's pointless. It's futile. What do you feel about it? Do you think there is a place for the merging, for bringing the more theatre style stuff into the circle? Do you think the future of street performance is just this ever decreasing group of material, or can people start bringing more artistic things in there and spread the medium?
Well, there's a lot of questions there, but it's basically like it's always possible to create those moments. It's just that the conditions need to be right. So if you ever see a good follow clown do a melodrama, you'll know that it's possible to create a beautiful moment and a theatrical sequence like that, you know. So that's always possible. If you're talking about, you know, a rainy Tuesday morning on the West Piazza in November, it's going to be almost impossible to create moments like that because often you need to be surrounded by a willing audience to make that happen, you know. So in that respect, the conditions have to be right. But as I said before, if you can make people laugh and charm them, they will stay and watch whatever it is you're doing. But as you said at the beginning of this, it's almost like, you know, the formula has been trimmed down that people see an easy way to hold a crowd and make money now. And so that is a lot of what you will see in a busking environment. Not in a festival environment, but in a busking environment. And I suppose one of the main differences is when I first started, you never saw people telling an audience that they had to do this and they had to do that. They would do something which would make an audience clap, make an audience cheer. They might say, come on, you can do better than that. But they wouldn't say, we're all going to clap and we're all going to cheer. And then we're going to do this afterwards. I mean, the start of the show, clapping and cheering is a different matter. But what I mean is you wouldn't have that kind of relentless hammering the audience for noise and energy that you get in a lot of street shows. You would have a much more pleasant bubble of.
God knows I've been guilty of that.
Tricks. Well, plenty of people do it, and it for some people it suits them, doesn't it? And for some people, an audience really enjoys it.
Well, I think it's the whole battle between content and craft. Like your craft is constantly the craft is the hat, and the size of the crowd, the enjoyment of the crowd. And then content is what you want to do. It's what you want to say. It's the things you want to put inside of there. And it feels like there's a tussle between the two.
Yeah, there is an antagonism for sure. But I suppose what you do is if you find that you can't do what you want on the street as an art form, maybe you take it elsewhere. Maybe you get funding for it. Maybe you do it in a comedy club. Maybe you do it as part of an arts festival. Maybe you do it in a gallery. Maybe what you're doing isn't suited to a busking environment. It might be a great outdoor act. And a lot of the stuff that you will see at good festivals are great outdoor acts because they interact with the people around them and their surroundings and their environment and all the rest of it. They do all that effective stuff, but they would die a death if you put them on any busking pitch, really. So, but it's an age-old problem, isn't it? But there's a lot of space out there for people to do things. Unfortunately, in the current environment, there's going to be a lot less money around for people to be funded to do stuff. And I wonder if we will see a great influx of people going back to busking. I've certainly thought that I should go out and do some singing and sell some CDs, which is something I haven't done as a street musician since I was a teenager, So.
Wow, but then it's a new tomorrow. I potentially see the next couple of years, if we don't get squashed by legislation, as being a golden time for the street. Maybe we could have a golden 2 or 3 years when Corona danger really has passed, where the street is the place to be for a little while before people go back into the venues.
I look forward to a time when the Corona danger has passed. It doesn't seem very likely.
Oh, God, yes. Oh, it seems like it's going to go forever at this moment, doesn't it?
I've got 9% left. It's going to go down quickly. So maybe anything else.
So last thing I'd like to say, is there anything you want to say to people who are beginning or the people who have watched now? Kind of closing comments for everyone.
People who are beginning to do street shows?
Yeah.
I think there is a lot of merit in busking. And by that I mean, street entertainment, doing shows on the street for money, unprogrammed. But I think for most people, not everybody, but for most people, they are a lot happier if they do a broader variety of things than just that. And if they can perform elsewhere as well, I think they have a bit more fun, really. And I can only speak personally. And I know there are people who've been working the streets for 30, 40 years who are very happy with what they do. And I've got no argument with that at all. But for me personally, if I'd have carried on grinding out street shows, I think I would have been very miserable, probably. Still miserable a lot of the time, but I much prefer to do a variety of stuff. And the people that I've met, in different places, in the theatres where we've worked, at the festivals I've worked at, Glastonbury is like a second family to me. the people I know through schools who, having toured with them for years and years, have become very close friends. And there's also just a lot more diversity in those people. I was trying to think, because I saw that Judith had said, you don't have many women on this, and I was trying to think of the people that I'd known who were busking female street entertainers, and on British pitches there haven't been many buskers as opposed to paid performers. In Covent Garden, I really only remember in my time, Aileen and Cherie, who was there for a long time, who runs a theatre company in Croydon now. Petra and Charlotte were just before me doing stuff. Sharon, who came through, Tamara, who came through, Mez, who was working at the time. But probably in my 6, 7, 8 years full time, those are the only female performers I really remember. And there were.
I know you got 9%, but it's such a big subject. But yeah, I do think it's more difficult for female performers. I 100% do. There's no question.
Yeah, but it's an important subject, and it's interesting to hear. Aileen's chat with you was very interesting, and it's interesting to hear why there aren't more, because it's hard out there, but there's a lot of hard, tough female performers, So I don't know. That's a subject for another day, but yeah, as I was saying, get a variety of stuff in.
It is very much so. Cool. So, Matt, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Really has been a massive privilege to sit and talk with you tonight. Thank you so much. Last chance to say goodbye to everyone if you wish to.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable talking to you. And I wish everybody well, and I hope you're safe. And let's hope there's an end to this shit soon, and we can all get out there and have a nice time. And good luck with the rest of it. See you later.
Cool. Love you, everyone. I guess we'll see you on the other side. For now, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.